Thanks for joining me for this special episode of Mr. Ed Codes, and in this episode I wanted to take on the challenge of making asteroids in P5JS. Now, I took the easy road because I don't like to reinvent the wheel, so I watched Daniel Shiffman from the coding train. He did it in two parts, and he just laid down the basic engine, and then it's up to me or whoever else is following it to put the extra stuff on there, like keep score and all of that. So at the end of the video, and I'm going to play a little bit of the tutorial here while I describe what happened. If you followed the tutorial, you discovered at the end that he wasn't done, that there was an array, the lasers array, is just growing to infinity. Every time you shoot a bullet and it goes off the screen, there's nothing taking that element out of the array, so it just goes on forever. You're 10 minutes into the game and a bullet you fired 10 minutes ago is 3 miles down the screen, so you got to take that off or else the array builds and it slows down the game, and eventually it could stop it. It could crash, runs out of memory or whatever. So it was an important issue, and Daniel tries to fix it here. So he's not successful in fixing it. It looks like he is, but if you run the program you'll find out that you're going to run into an error eventually, because he puts first of all, he makes a function that tests to see if the bullets are out of range. That part he got right. And then where he's putting the condition that tests to see if it's off and then it removes that element, that's the tricky part. So you can't do that inside the double nested loop like he did, because you're going to end up removing an element that you're testing for, and that's where you run into errors. So what you have to do is keep track of which element went off the screen. And since at any given cycle there'll only be one bullet that goes off the screen, there might be an instance where two of them could possibly, but I don't see that happening. So ordinarily one element of the laser array is going to be off the screen at any given cycle. So you're only going to be recording one, you're only going to be looking for one variable there. So you put your condition in, you look for the laser that went off the screen. If it did, you store that loop value. So in this case it's a 4i loop. So he has a 4i loop. Inside that he has a 4j loop. So inside the 4i loop, before the 4j loop, you're just going to put in that condition that tests if a laser went off the edge, and if it has, you're going to store that I variable. And then at the end of all of that looping, fall out of all of it. So at the end of the 4i loop, the close bracket, right after that you're going to test again to see was an element off the screen. If it was, splice out the element that is the variable that you stored up in the loop. So you could use like remove laser equals I, and then at the outside the loop, if a laser needs to be removed, splice out remove laser instead of using the loop variable, and then that's going to solve that problem. So once that problem is solved, we move on to the next part of it, which is adding all of the goodies. So when Asteroids was first made in 1979, people didn't have access to video games like they do today. You have them on your phone, they're everywhere. But back then, if you wanted to play a video game, you either had to buy a console system, which was extremely expensive, and then they didn't. I think the only one when Asteroids came out was Pong, and that's the only game it played. It wasn't until the 80s we saw the cartridge games. But before then, you'd go to the arcade and you'd drop in a quarter, which in today's money is around $2. Actually, it's around $1.50 to $2 in today's money. You would put into one of these machines and you'd play for 10 or 15 minutes. You'd lose your man, the game over, and you'd have to start over again. The games were designed to take quarters away from people. They weren't designed really to let a person play for an hour on 25 cents. In order to do that, you had to invest a lot of money and a lot of time to defeat the progressively difficult levels. So in Asteroids there was a number of things, a number of hazards. And I'm going to show you my version here after Daniel's video stops here. In my version, you don't have 3 ships. So when you just barely touch an asteroid and your ship explodes, well, let's think of that in practical terms. You're going to send a ship into an asteroid field without shields. So my first idea was, we got to put some shields on this thing. In the original version, they had this key called hyperspace, and basically that was just a trick. That was a hazard to take your quarter away, because you had a fairly random chance of reappearing. Basically, it'd make your ship disappear and reappear on another part of the screen. It was like a Hail Mary to not get crushed by an impending asteroid. Chances are you would be put in another hazard and you're not escaping it. So it was basically just a way to make you think that you had a little bit more power, a better chance of surviving, but it was going to take your quarter. So I got rid of that altogether. I added the shields. If your shield, now it seems like if you get hit 3 times by a really big asteroid, directly hit, it will remove all of your shields. So it's kind of like 3 lives, but it's all kind of crammed in one. They started doing the life meter in, I think, the late 80s or so, instead of the 3 lives thing, or in combination to the 3 lives things, because these games were getting progressively harder over the years, so you wanted to give people a better chance of surviving. So these are some of the strategies that you would use to be a little bit more forgiving in the game. I can bump into an asteroid, it's not going to immediately destroy me. And as I shoot asteroids, my shield recovers. And if I don't shoot any asteroids, if I just fly around and evade the asteroids, my shield recovers, but not as much. So you have that advantage. And it lets you get up in the levels. Now, every time a level increases, the number of starting asteroids increases, and this doesn't stop. So good luck when you've got 500 asteroids on filling every square inch of the screen. So there is a point at which it's going to get almost impossible to do this game. So you have that, that pressure to just get a high score, because you know you're not going to break this game. So you get those high scores are important, and I'm still working on the scoring, but right now every asteroid is the same score. In the original, larger ones were worth less than small ones. And also in the original, there was a saucer that would come out and shoot at you. I haven't put that in here yet. I've been thinking about it. I don't know. I like playing with the game that it is. I think the saucer is just a way to take your quarter away. So I'm trying to get rid of those hazards that were there to take away quarters in order for the game to be like a free play, more fun idea. So that's pretty much my game here. And at the end here, I wanted to show you how I really zhushed it up. I took some graphics, put them in like an overlay, and then recorded the game with the video part of it in the center of this overlay. So it kind of looks like the video game cabinet. I'll show you that here. And I also changed the colors to black and white. So one of the things I did want to say about the original game and why it was so clever is it was done with the vector monitor that used an oscilloscope, I'm pretty sure. And that allowed it to create graphics that weren't pixelated like you would normally see on a broadcast television. So it wasn't made of dots, it was made of smooth lines of this electron beam, and the phosphorus would fade down, and that would leave this trail effect. So that's what I did here. I adjusted the display settings, the attributes, so it would leave that kind of fade down of the phosphorus glow. It doesn't show up so well in this color version, but in the black and white version it shows up really good. And also the asteroids are randomly generated. Their geometry is a random generation. In the original, there were components that made up each asteroid, and then those were scalable. So large asteroids, each one of them looked exactly alike, and when they would break up, it would just look like a smaller scale of it. And I don't believe they rotated. They just moved statically across the screen. So these are randomly generated geometries done with vectors, and they rotate. So I like that look of when they rotate, whatever side they're moving toward, the other side of the asteroid is kind of glowing with that phosphorus fade effect. So I kind of like that. It also, one other thing, you'll notice maybe here in the stand-up version that I made, the quote-unquote stand-up version, the asteroids that are further away from the ship are harder to see. They're faded. And then when they get closer, they're brighter. This may seem like a disadvantage because you don't see the ones that are potentially going to come at you from a further distance. But what actually happens is, cognitively, those are off the table. So you're just paying attention to the more eminent ones. I think it actually helps the gameplay, because you're not, as long as you stay in the center and you don't make any wild moves into a place that looks empty, but as soon as you get there it's full of asteroids, as long as you don't do that, it is actually a kind of a great element to the gameplay, because it keeps you not as distracted by the ones that are further away. Does that make any sense? And whenever the ship moves and it hits an asteroid, it loses its momentum. It stops it in place. And the ship can thrust infinitely. So if you have a clear range, you can get that ship just zipping across the screen faster than the bullets can shoot out of it. But it's kind of hard to do that, because if there's an asteroid, you're going to eventually run into it and it will stop you. So I guess that's it for this video and my tribute to Asteroids and how to make it funner with gameplay spirit instead of the let's take 25 cents from people. You know, it was $8 billion worth of quarters during the heyday of the arcade period. $8 billion worth of quarters these games pulled out of people's pockets, so they must have been fun. Thanks for joining me, and as always, until next time, you guys, take care.